She said it in a room full of people, and she said it loud enough for the right ears to catch it. Laura stood near the bar, one hand on a glass she barely drank from, the other resting too comfortably on Marcus's arm. He was laughing, wide and physical, taking space like the room belonged to him. Someone from her agency leaned in, smiling, and Laura answered with that practiced tone she used when she wanted something to land without sounding cruel. She said I only wanted her body. She said it like a conclusion, not an accusation. No one looked at me. That was the trick. Public enough to be felt, private enough to deny. Marcus glanced around, satisfied, as if he'd just won something without having to ask. He was everywhere lately. Charity dinners, industry lunches, weekend openings at his restaurants. Always loud, always close, always touching. I didn't react. I kept my jacket on. I stayed where I was. A senior partner from my firm shook my hand and talked about a deal that almost collapsed last quarter. I listened. I nodded. Laura watched from across the room, waiting for a crack. It never came. Later, she crossed the room without urgency, as if nothing had happened. Her smile was professional, controlled. Marcus stayed behind, already talking to someone else, already expanding. I left before she did. No announcement. No message. Outside, the city kept moving like it always does. By the next morning, my calendar no longer matched hers. That was the first change she didn't see. The first real shift came from someone who wasn't trying to help me. It happened during a routine check-in at the office, the kind where people speak carefully because they assume nothing personal ever crosses those walls. Ethan from legal mentioned Marcus casually while flipping through a folder, noted one of his restaurants had been flagged during a vendor audit tied to a corporate event. The tone wasn't accusatory. It was observational, the way professionals share patterns without drawing conclusions. Marcus's name kept surfacing after that. Not directly. Never in a way that demanded a response. A facilities manager mentioned him sponsoring a private dinner tied to Laura's agency. A junior analyst joked about how often Marcus showed up at company functions without being on the invite list. No one connected the dots out loud. They didn't have to. At home, nothing changed on the surface. Laura moved through the apartment like a set piece that had been placed just right. She talked about projects, about clients, about reputation management and perception. She never mentioned Marcus. She didn't need to. His presence was already baked into the room. I adjusted quietly. Meetings moved earlier. Workouts shifted to times she wasn't around. I stopped attending the public events where Marcus liked to perform. When I was home, I stayed neutral. Available, but not engaged. Present, but not participating. She noticed the logistics before she noticed the distance. Questions came lightly at first, framed as concern. I answered without detail. No explanations. No defense. The real change wasn't emotional. It was structural. I was no longer part of the stage she was building. And she didn't realize how much she relied on that until it was already gone. The proof didn't arrive all at once. It surfaced in fragments, the way problems usually do when people assume no one is paying attention. An expense report crossed my desk late one evening, routed to me by mistake. A corporate card charged at one of Marcus's restaurants, not tied to any client event. The name on the reservation matched Laura's assistant. That detail stayed quiet in my head. A few days later, a shared calendar updated itself on the kitchen tablet. A recurring block appeared under a neutral label, scheduled during hours she said were internal meetings. The location tag didn't match her office. It matched a part of the city Marcus favored, the stretch where his newer places clustered like trophies. Her phone started lighting up more often at home. She never hid it. She didn't need to. Notifications were muted. The screen always went dark the second I entered the room. At night, she placed it face down on the dresser, a habit she'd never had before. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask questions. I adjusted permissions on accounts I managed. I separated finances that didn't need to be shared. I redirected my own communications to devices she didn't touch. She watched my face more closely after that. Not with guilt, with curiosity, as if she was testing how much pressure it took before something cracked. Nothing did. The more she escalated, the less visible I became. By the time she realized I was collecting patterns instead of reacting to them, the window to control the narrative had already closed. I didn't leave the apartment. That would have been too visible. Instead, I removed myself from the rhythm that made her feel secure. Mornings changed first. I was gone before she woke up, already on calls, already elsewhere. Evenings stretched later. Dinners were missed without explanation. When I was home, I moved through rooms without stopping, without asking how her day went. She tried to reinsert herself by adjusting her own schedule, showing up earlier, canceling plans, sitting closer on the couch. Physical proximity replaced conversation. It didn't work. Touch stopped happening without either of us announcing it. Days passed, then weeks. No fights, no ultimatums, just absence where connection used to be. She started sending messages during the day, short updates, photos from meetings, nothing urgent. I responded late, sometimes not at all. Not to punish, to change the structure. She began checking my location more often, asking neutral questions that carried weight underneath them. Marcus stayed visible. He didn't scale back. If anything, he took up more space. I saw his name tagged in posts from events I no longer attended. Laura appeared beside him in group photos, always angled, always controlled. She wanted me to notice. I did. I just didn't acknowledge it. One evening, I didn't come home. No warning. No excuse. I stayed elsewhere and let the silence do the work I refused to do out loud. By morning, my side of the bed was cold. That was when she finally understood something had shifted that couldn't be managed. Marcus liked pressure. He mistook volume for control. That made him predictable. I didn't go after him directly. I didn't need to. His business relied on momentum, on the idea that nothing ever slowed him down. I knew how fragile that illusion was. A compliance review landed on my desk through a mutual contact who owed me from years back. It wasn't a favor. It was a routine question that didn't look like one. I pointed nothing out. I asked for nothing. I let the process move the way it was designed to move when attention was finally applied. Around the same time, Laura's agency began scrambling. One of Marcus's upcoming openings had been positioned as a major client win. Suddenly, the timeline slipped. Permits stalled. Investors went quiet. The narrative she'd been selling no longer matched reality, and she had no clean explanation for it. At home, she became restless. Her calls grew sharper. She paced during conversations she used to glide through. Marcus stopped showing up as confidently. His name disappeared from her casual updates, replaced by vague references to complications. She tried to draw me back in by offering information, by acting like we were still a team managing overlapping crises. I stayed neutral. I listened without engaging. I didn't correct her assumptions. I didn't step in. The pressure didn't come from me. That was the point. Structures started leaning under their own weight. Marcus pushed harder. Laura worked longer. And for the first time, neither of them could tell where the instability was coming from. I watched it unfold from a distance I had already secured. The shift became visible to other people before Laura admitted it to herself. It happened at a fundraiser she had insisted we attend together, framing it as a reset. I arrived late and stayed near the edges. She noticed immediately, not because I ignored her, but because others did. Conversations that used to flow toward her stalled. A colleague from her agency glanced past her, scanning the room for someone else. A donor she'd cultivated for months offered a polite smile and moved on. Marcus arrived with his usual confidence, but the response wasn't the same. A few nods, short exchanges, no gravity. Someone made a comment close enough for her to hear, framed as concern. It wasn't cruel. It was worse than that. It suggested people had already adjusted their expectations. Laura laughed it off. Her posture tightened. She tried to pull me into conversations, using proximity as proof. I didn't resist. I didn't participate either. I answered when spoken to and redirected attention away from us. The image she relied on required alignment. I refused to provide it. By the end of the evening, she was alone in a way she hadn't been before. Not abandoned, repositioned. Marcus drifted toward louder groups, searching for traction. It wasn't there. On the drive home, she spoke about optics, about misunderstandings, about timing. I listened without interruption. When we arrived, I didn't follow her inside. I stayed in the car long enough for the silence to register. That night, she checked her phone more than she slept. Messages went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. The room she'd built her influence in had quietly moved on without her permission. Isolation didn't arrive dramatically. It crept in through small failures she wasn't used to managing. Calls that went to voicemail. Messages answered hours later, if at all. Meetings shortened. Familiar names removed from group threads without explanation. She kept moving, but the floor under her had softened. At home, she searched for stability where it used to be automatic. She lingered in shared spaces, asked practical questions that didn't require emotional risk, commented on things I was already handling. I remained consistent and distant, answering only what was necessary, never expanding. Marcus became less present. His confidence shifted into irritation. His visits stopped being spontaneous. When he did appear, it was brief and tense. Whatever momentum he'd relied on was gone, and he didn't know how to operate without it. Laura felt that loss more sharply than she admitted. She tried to rebuild control through routine. Gym sessions, networking breakfasts, curated posts that suggested normalcy. The engagement wasn't there. People responded politely, not urgently. The difference mattered. One evening, she sat across from me and spoke about exhaustion, about pressure, about how quickly things were changing. She didn't ask for help directly. She framed it as observation. I acknowledged it without stepping closer. That was when she understood I wasn't withdrawing out of confusion or jealousy. I was already elsewhere, operating on a timeline she didn't have access to. The realization unsettled her more than any argument could have. She wasn't being punished. She was being left behind while everything kept moving. The confrontation didn't happen when she planned it. It never does. She waited until the apartment was quiet, until there were no notifications pulling her attention elsewhere. She positioned herself carefully, choosing a moment when I wasn't rushing out or on a call. Control mattered to her, even then. She spoke calmly at first. She framed it as concern, as distance she couldn't explain. She referenced the months without touch, without naming them directly, as if avoiding the words might soften their weight. She said she felt invisible. She said things felt misaligned. She said she didn't understand when we stopped being close. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct the timeline. I didn't offer reassurance. I listened the way I do when someone is outlining a problem they don't realize is already solved. She adjusted tactics when silence didn't pull me in. Her tone shifted, less polished. She asked if I was seeing someone else, if I was planning something, if there was something she needed to fix. The questions came faster then, stacked too tightly. I told her very little. I said I was fine. I said work was demanding. I said I didn't feel the need to explain every adjustment I made. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. That was the moment she understood she was no longer negotiating. I wasn't withholding to gain leverage. I had already stepped out of the exchange entirely. She watched me like someone watching a door close without hearing it latch. Her collapse didn't come with tears or scenes. It came quietly, through erosion. Marcus faded first. His name stopped appearing in her messages entirely. When it did surface, it was framed as a complication, a mistake, something that had run its course without delivering what it promised. The chaos she had leaned into offered no shelter when the attention dried up. Work followed. Accounts were reassigned. A campaign she'd anchored lost priority. Meetings she once led were handed to someone else without explanation. No one accused her of anything. They simply adjusted. Reputation work depends on confidence, and hers had thinned. At home, she moved more carefully, as if the space itself had changed ownership. She watched me pack a travel bag one evening without asking where I was going. She noticed documents missing from the shared drawer. She noticed passwords no longer worked. The future she assumed we were building had gone quiet. Memories started surfacing for her then, not as reflection but as interference. Moments she'd ignored replayed out of order. Me standing still while she performed. Me leaving early. Me listening without reacting. Patterns she hadn't needed to understand before began demanding explanation. She reached out to people who used to orbit her easily. Responses were delayed. Some didn't come at all. The support she expected wasn't there. I didn't change my behavior. I didn't escalate. I simply continued living the version of my life that no longer included managing her perception. Her loss wasn't dramatic. It was comprehensive. By the time she understood what she'd lost, there was no audience left to witness it, and no one left to blame but the silence she'd underestimated. The end didn't arrive as a decision. It arrived as a logistical adjustment she noticed too late. One morning, my schedule no longer intersected with hers at all. No shared plans. No assumptions. The apartment felt staged, like a place waiting to be vacated rather than lived in. She tried once more to reach me, not with questions this time, but with honesty stripped of strategy. She spoke without framing, without polish. She acknowledged the distance, the months without touch, the tension she'd mistaken for control. She admitted she thought I would break first. She thought the absence would force a reaction she could manage. I didn't argue. I didn't validate. I listened, then stood and gathered what was already separated. There was no rush, no anger, just completion. I didn't disappear dramatically. I didn't block her. I didn't announce anything. I removed myself from the future she kept referencing, one practical step at a time. By the time she understood I wasn't coming back into alignment, there was nothing left to negotiate. She stood in the doorway as I left, not asking me to stay, just watching, as if observation alone might restore what had already passed. I didn't look back. Later, she would tell herself a story about what happened. People always do. But the truth was simpler than anything she could frame. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.